Chapter 7. Jake waited in the gray concrete room with a single window. His father's head lawyer, Craymarn, was there, already seated. He watched Jake pace the small space. Jake and Craymarn had gone over the evidence that had been offered by the FBI to go against the drug-running charges. It was substantial. Most of it was based on David Ramsley's statements testifying to Robert's guilt. Some of it was eyewitness accounts from people who were in the drug smuggling industry offering their testimony in an attempt to find lighter sentences for themselves. There was physical evidence from the Ramsley insurance, 3 decades of laundering money through the company. The accounting was incriminatory. Jake wondered how they would fight the charges. The door opened and a guard ushered Robert Ramsley in. Jake's father wore an orange jumpsuit with shackles. He looked gray and drawn, not the man who commanded boardrooms of people. The guard escorted Robert to his seat, unlocking the shackles but looping a pair of handcuffs through a bar on the table before clasping them over Robert's wrists. Checking that they were secure, he nodded to Craymarn. "You have 30 minutes. Jake waited until the guard had exited before sitting down. "Dad, are you okay?" "I'm fine," Robert said tersely. He sighed and frowned. "I'm sorry about this." "What do you mean?" Jake had rarely heard his father apologize before. "I didn't mean to do this to you boys. At the time, I thought I was helping to save both our companies. Things had been bad for pharmaceutical and insurance industries. There was a rash of lawsuits that David was not winning. He was having a hard time getting new drug research underway that was costly, and some of his staff had walked out on him. The insurance business was not faring much better. We were taking too many losses. Other insurance companies were folding under the financial pressure, and it came close for us. I could not let that happen. The Ramsley name had a reputation to uphold, and I had a family to support." "Dad," Jake looked at Robert in astonishment. "You did not do this." "I did. Oh, I didn't smuggle the drugs," grimaced Robert. "I never had a hand in that. That was all David's doing. He just gave me the money to launder through Ramsley Insurance. That is my crime. Laundering drug money and profiting from it. It bore the company through a tough time. That money helped me build the company up so I could hand an empire over to my sons. I was greedy, so help me. When I come before the judge tomorrow, I will plead guilty to laundering money and being accessory to drug smuggling." Jake leaned back in his chair. He struggled to believe what his father had just told him. "I have resigned my position with the company. Everett will have to take over your role. You're now in charge and will have to deal with the fallout. I am sorry about that." Robert apologized again, his eyes bleak as he looked at his oldest son. "It's a bad position I've left you in." "Uncle David is free pending his testimony against you." Jake leaned forward. "How is it that he's not in prison? How is it he managed to turn this around so that he is not at fault?" "David is pinning it on me, Ted, and Michael," Robert responded. "Ted Searson did help David with the drops until they put other people in place to do the dirty work for them as they grew older. With Ted dead, there's no one who can put David on all the drops those years ago. I never saw the drugs. I just had a portion of the money to launder. I guess it was more than Ted and David's companies could handle without alerting the authorities, which is probably why I was offered the opportunity. I never knew Michael might be involved until now when the FBI arrested him." They would not have arrested him without some evidence. Jake could still not believe that his cousin was involved. They had grown up together. While Michael was an intensely private person, he was not the criminal type. "Maybe so," Robert mused. "Maybe so," Robert mused. "Just doesn't make sense to me. Michael, who's wealthy in his own right, still having drug residue on his boat? How stupid would that be to use his own boat for drops where the FBI could collect evidence from, when his own father had outsourced that part of the operation long ago? No, I don't buy it." "You think Uncle David is framing his own son?" questioned Jake. Robert's reasoning mirrored his own, and Jake wondered what he could do to help clear Michael's name. "David's always been about himself. He is a man not to be crossed, and Michael forced him to retire." Robert shook his head, replying bitterly, "Don't ask me how. I have no idea. Whether Michael is really involved or not, I don't know, but it would not surprise me if David threw his own son to the wolves. David's thoughts on loyalty and trust only apply to himself. He's a sick man who's drunk on power. We should have done something about him long ago." "What can I do?" wondered Jake. "I wish I knew." Robert sighed again. "Right now, you'll probably have your hands full taking care of the company and your mother. Beverly's going to be distraught over this." "Dad, are you sure you don't want to fight this? There might be some legality, some loophole we can exploit," insisted Jake. The last thing he wanted was his father to go to jail. "No. It's time I paid for my wrongdoings." Robert stared steadily at Jake. "I should have stepped down years ago when Everett was ready to take on a division. I should have let you be in charge. Instead, I've held on too long. I suppose I was addicted to the power as well. Do not do that to yourself, Jake. Remember, the company pays the bills, but it should not be your entire life. If it goes under because of my actions, let it go and take care of your family. Don't let it hang like an albatross around your neck like I let it do to me." "You've always loved working at Ramsley Insurance. We were expected to follow you into the family business." Jake frowned at Robert as he remembered. There was never any question that a Ramsley does not follow their father into business. "That is a full expectation put on us by our fathers, and we transferred it to each of you," Robert growled. "It was wrong of me to do that, just as it was wrong of my brothers to do it to their sons. Do not do it to your kids when you get married." Jake blinked in surprise. He had no idea his father felt this way. They rarely talked like this, laying everything into the open. The door to the room opened as the guard stepped back in, bringing the interview to a close. "Dad, you need to let Dylan and Everett visit," Jake said as he rose from his chair, giving his father's hand a squeeze. "I know." Robert cleared his throat, blinking back tears. "Not until I've entered my plea. I don't want them to talk me out of doing the right thing." Jake nodded. He could respect his father for that. Craymarn and Jake left the room, escorted by another guard. "We're going to have to do our best to try to get his time reduced. He is cooperating, but his age is against him and his health. Hopefully the judge will be sympathetic." Craymarn did not sound too hopeful himself. "What do you mean, his health?" Jake frowned and gave Craymarn a searching look. "High blood pressure, diabetes, arteriosclerosis," the lawyer explained. "Time is not on your father's side." This was the first time anyone had told Jake about it. Scowling, Jake thanked Craymarn and went to find out if he could get a visit with Michael today. He made his way back to the office to see if it was possible. He was led by a guard to a room to wait. Jake was surprised to find Max waiting as well to speak to Michael. "Jake!" Max extended a hand with a grin. "Good to see you!" Jake shook Max's hand in greeting. "How are things going?" "Just came to visit Michael." Max sobered as he thought about his brother being held in prison. "I cannot believe what is happening." "Do you mind if I tag along?" inquired Jake. "I have a couple of questions I would like answered." "Sure," Max responded in his usual easy way. "I don't have a problem with it if the prison guys don't." They both signed in to see Michael. A guard led them to a room where they would wait. "So you were in a plane crash?" Max whistled. "That must have been some fun." "Not really," Jake said shortly. He really didn't want to talk about his excursion on the mountain with Sterling. "Dylan told me he had a visitor yesterday. He was debating whether to talk to you or not about her." Max studied his watch like it held all the answers to the universe. Jake knew that when Max was like this, he wanted his audience to draw the answers out of him. Jake did not feel like being a cooperative audience, especially when he suspected that Sterling had been the one to visit Dylan. Although why she would be going to talk to Dylan, Jake did not know. He frowned and waited for Max to get impatient enough to continue, because Jake was not going to ask. Max rolled his eyes. "You are stubborn." "Always have been. Jake responded with a frown. It was a family trait. He took a seat, pretending that he did not care.
Sterling Denver came by to give a piece of her mind, Max announced, unable to wait for Jake to say anything. I wonder why she would do that.
Since Dylan told you about it, I am taking that as a rhetorical question, muttered Jake.
You tanked her career.
Max looked at Jake with some awe.
What did she do that was so bad that she cannot get another job in the print industry?
Jake gave Max a hard look.
She has dragged this family through the mud with that tabloid of hers. Enough was enough. She did the same as any other tabloid.
Max raised an eyebrow.
Are you going to buy all the papers up and disband them? Even you are not that rich.
Jake bit back a caustic response. It was not Max's fault how things had happened, and he was not going to take his feelings out on his cousin.
I had just cause. Really? Persisted Max. You knocked her down pretty hard.
I'm sure she will be fine, he responded, trying to sound disinterested.
Somehow I doubt that.
Max frowned as he contemplated Jake.
I did a little research. Blacklisting someone is illegal, you know.
So is price fixing, but we know that large corporations do that all the time. Jake shrugged it off and tried not to feel guilty.
What did she do that was so bad?
Max genuinely wanted to know.
She lied to me, Jake reluctantly said.
He hardened his heart against the feeling of hurt that talking about Sterling provoked. He did not want to talk about her, or even think about her. Max whistled again as he studied Jake.
You fell in love with her.
What? Jake narrowed his eyes and glared at Max.
I did no such thing. You did, Max grinned triumphantly. That is why you have gone overboard to get her back. You wanted her to hurt as much as she hurt you. Very immature, Jake.
That is not what this is about in the least, Jake growled, ignoring the idea that Max might have some truth to what he said. Not the love part, but certainly the getting Sterling back.
She's been libeling this family for years. Her articles were outrageous. I put a stop to them. I would think that you might be grateful. Her articles were no worse than any other tabloid paper, scoffed Max. All I did was make sure that she would not work in the industry again.
Jake shrugged away the guilt that he had overstepped the bounds of right and wrong. He made certain that she would not work in a lot of industries. Any job that put words to media where the public might hear, read, or see them.
She said, you destroyed her, replied a thoughtful Max. Actually, if I recall what Dylan told me, she said you destroyed not only her, but an entire town. Do you know what she was talking about?
Jake could only shake his head. He did not know what Sterling had meant by that mysterious comment. His gut was telling him that he had done something terribly wrong. The door opened and the guard let Michael in. Again, the process of unshackling and handcuffing Michael to the steel table happened.
Where did he get that bruise?
Max angrily asked the guard. There was a bruise on Michael's cheekbone. Michael gestured to Max with a hand motion, as if asking him to forget about it.
I am not going to forget about it, Max said hotly. Someone is going to be held accountable for that. If you'd like to file a report, you can do so at the main desk when you leave, the guard replied. You'll be observed by a guard through the window at all times. When 30 minutes have expired, I will return for the prisoner.
Max muttered as the guard left, not liking his attitude. Michael held out a hand in greeting to Jake as best as he was able, considering he was restricted by the handcuffs. Jake shook Michael's hand.
It's good to see you, Michael.
His cousin nodded. Jake had to remind himself that Michael no longer spoke. A few years ago, Michael had undergone an operation to remove 2 tumors from his brain. As a result, he suffered a small amount of brain damage to the language part of the brain. Michael could no longer read, write, or talk properly. Sometimes he could not find the right word to say. Sometimes he substituted the wrong word entirely. For the most part, Michael now limited his responses and used gestures or people who knew him well enough to help him communicate with others.
I was hoping to ask you a few questions,
Jake began, and at Michael's nod he continued.
I want you to know that my father has admitted his guilt in this and is going to take responsibility for his actions.
Both Max and Michael were surprised by Jake's words. "I need to know." Jake studied Michael for any sign of guilt. "Did you smuggle any of the drugs?" "Hey!" Max growled, leaning forward. "We all know Michael is innocent." "No." Michael's voice was rusty as he responded. He cleared his throat and waited, watching Jake. "Did you know that your father was smuggling drugs?" Jake questioned. "No." Michael's tongue struggled over the word, and his face showed a flare of annoyance at his ineptness at answering a simple question. "Did you know David was laundering money through Ramsley Pharmaceuticals?" Jake persisted. Michael hesitated. He looked to Max. "We've already gone through this," Max informed Jake. "There were accounting errors uncovered that led us to believe there might be money being laundered through the company. We didn't know by who, or that the money was from legal drugs if that is where it came from. All we know is that there are discrepancies." "How long have the discrepancies been going on?" Jake turned to look at Max. 30 years, sighed Max. "Did no one think to inform the police?" Jake looked at Michael. He had been David's right hand throughout the years. If anyone had known, it would have been Michael. Michael looked at Jake in frustration. "Michael found out about the discrepancies when Dad retired as head of the company. He had an independent audit conducted," Max explained. "It found no conclusive evidence where the money came from or where it went to. Michael brought the matter to Christian Gaines and the lawyer team. However, when Michael had his surgery and resigned, the matter was neglected." "Do you think Gaines was in on the money laundering?" Jake wondered why it had not been followed up. Missing money was a big deal, especially if the amounts mirrored what had been filtered through Ramsley Insurance. "I don't know." Max looked at Michael, who shook his head, then shrugged. "We both like to think that Gaines is an honest man." Christian Gaines was now head of Ramsley Pharmaceuticals. The only Ramsley currently working at the company was Noah. He was head of the laboratory division and likely to be groomed for the role of director once Gaines retired, something that Noah was not looking forward to. "I need to know what the FBI have against you for evidence, and when your hearing is," Jake informed them. "We're going to get to the bottom of this. I assume you're pleading not guilty?" Michael grimaced and nodded. "What was that about?" Jake looked at Max for an explanation. "The judge wants him to verbalize his plea," Max said dryly. "Michael thinks he's going to mess it up." Michael gestured in emotion. With his expression, it was easy for Jake to understand that Michael was pretty certain he would mess up the plea. "Then don't do it," Jake responded. "They can't make you. Plus it would look bad to a jury if you say that and nothing much else to your defense. However, let's hope it doesn't get that far. I'm going to hire the best investigators that I can to figure out what is really going on here." "We've already done that," commented Max. "We're doing our best to get Michael out of here." "What about bail?" Jake asked Max. "That's to be decided when Michael enters his plea." Max shrugged. "I bet it's going to be a pretty penny." Michael made a couple of motions with his hands. Jake looked to Max for clarification. "He says we're not to make ourselves poor trying to bail him out. All the accounts for Ramsley Pharma have been frozen, as well as Michael's assets," Max responded. He checked his watch. "We only have a couple minutes left, so let's get to the good news." "Good news?" Jake did not see how there could be any. Max pulled out a couple of pictures from his shirt with a happy smile. "The guard said I could give these to you." Michael took the photos and looked at them in awe. He pressed a hand to his mouth and blinked back tears. "They're all perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes," Max continued proudly with his news. "Paget and Elle are extremely jealous." Michael looked at Max sharply, a question in his eyes. "Anne is okay. She's tired and is going to need a lot of help, which we are more than happy to provide," Max answered gently. "She and Amy miss you." Michael wiped his eyes a moment and had a smile at the picture. His daughter Amy was smiling as she stood next to the 3 tiny babies lined up in a hospital bassinet. Michael had 4 daughters now. Just 6 years ago, no one would have thought this would have happened. 6 years ago, Michael and Anne had simply been boss and secretary. 4 girls? Jake was surprised. That had to be the longest streak of girls in Ramsley family history. In all the cousins there were 14 boys and 1 girl. For Michael to have 4 girls, it was unheard of for Ramsleys.
"We're going to get you home to those girls of yours," Max promised.
Michael nodded, still looking at the pictures. The door opened, and the guards stood there, waiting to usher Max and Jake away. They said their goodbyes and took their leave. Walking down the corridor, Max gave Jake a long look.
"He is innocent?"
Jake nodded. Now that he had a chance to talk to Michael, all doubts had been removed from his mind. He did believe that Michael had nothing to do with the drug smuggling. That left the only conclusion, that he was being framed by his father, David. Jake did not know how they were going to prove it.
"We'll pull our resources to get him out. I'll help however I can." "What you could do is reach out to that tabloid reporter,"
Max suggested seriously.
"What?"
Jake stiffened.
"She has resources that we don't. She knows people and can ask all sorts of questions we can't," responded Max. "Look, I know both of you are not getting along right now, but surely you can set aside any animosity if it helps Michael."
Jake did not want to do this. He was still angry at Sterling. Angry that she had lied to him, that he had trusted her, that he had liked her and wanted a relationship with her. Even through that anger he could see the wisdom of Max's words. It was with great reluctance when he replied,
"I will talk to her. She might not want to help us after all that I've done." "You mean the whole ruin her career thing?"
Max asked innocently.
"You might want to grovel for a while. Noah says that sometimes help when a man messes up. I found it did not work so well."
"I am not interested in her." Jake shot Max an angry look.
"You can stop matchmaking." "You heard about my new hobby?"
Max smiled, pleased at Jake's reaction. The fact that he thought that Max wanted to matchmake meant that Jake did indeed have feelings for Sterling. Jake just rolled his eyes and chose not to respond to Max's obvious delusions. "Hello?" Sterling mumbled into her phone. It was in the dead of night, and she had been dragged from her sleep by its incessant ringing. "It's Mindy," a female voice said. "I need to meet with you." Sterling sighed as she wiped sleep away from her eyes. "It is the middle of the night." There was a pause before Mindy spoke again. "You asked me to check to see if there were any drugs that Ramsey Pharma was experimenting on that resulted in a consistent case of anaphylactic shock." Sterling sat up in bed. Her attention caught. "You found one." "It's called EGM. It was buried 8 years ago as a failure. However, the paperwork and some samples were kept in case the government wanted to purchase them," continued Mindy. "In 80% of lab trials, the subject showed signs of moderate to severe allergic reactions, 60% of the time resulting in death if no intervention was given." "Tell me you made copies?" Sterling breathed in suspense. "I made a copy of the paperwork. It's worse than that." Mindy hesitated. "What?" demanded Sterling. "How can it be worse?" "One of the samples is missing." Mindy's voice was hushed. "I took pictures to prove it. No one signed it out. Only a few people have access to that lab, and it's gone." "Then David Ramsley could have murdered Ted Searson with no one the wiser." Sterling flipped on her light. This was the story of the year. She was going to make headlines and be a step ahead of everyone. The police, the papers. Grange was going to flip his lid. Reality intruded. She was unemployed and had nowhere to publish the story. "I need you to take this information. I can't carry it around, and I'm afraid someone is going to realize I was snooping, and then I'll get caught." Mindy sounded very afraid. "The pharmacy assistant turned up dead in the river today." "What pharmacy assistant?" Sterling asked, confused at that turn in the conversation. "The one who filled the prescriptions for Bethany Searson before she nearly died? The police want to question her, and she disappeared." Mindy filled Sterling in. "My boyfriend, Rick, said they found her floating in the river today." Sterling remembered that Mindy's boyfriend was a fireman who was part of the search and rescue crew in the city. A pit formed in her stomach. The last thing Sterling wanted was for something to happen to Mindy, or to anyone else that she happened to ask to look into David Ramsley's actions. "I will come. Can you meet me at the cafe we always use?" It's open this time of night. Sterling grabbed clothes at random from her closet after Mindy agreed. Maybe she could not put the information in the tabloids, but she could sell it to one. Or, if it was as incriminating as she thought, she could bring it to the police herself. David Ramsley needed to be stopped before someone else ended up dead. Sterling quickly grabbed her wallet and headed for the cafe. On the way, she stopped at the bank, depositing her last paycheck from Dubious and taking out as much as the ATM would allow her to. She never did electronic transfers to her sources. It was too risky that someone might find out her banking information and trace who her sources were. Keeping an eye out for muggers, Sterling crossed the street as quickly as her crutches would let her, heading straight for the nearby cafe. Mindy was already there, nervously fingering a mug as she waited. Sterling paid for a bottle of water. It was moderately cheaper than the cafe's coffee menu. It was also easier to carry with her crutches. Joining Mindy, she propped her crutches against the table. "Everything is in the envelope." Mindy put her bag between them both, a brown envelope peeking up out of the large purse. "I can't prove that Mr. Ramsley Sr. took the drug, but the whole situation is very suspect in light of Ted Searson's death." "That is very true." Sterling put her hand over the envelope, but Mindy grabbed her wrist. "Am I doing the right thing?" Mindy took a deep breath. "I keep asking myself that. This is important information. It will affect the company I work for. Stocks will go down. People might even lose their jobs. Mr. Ramsley might go to jail. I'm not sure I should be giving this information to you. I should probably take it to the police." "You could do that," Sterling agreed easily. She knew that Mindy's reluctance did not necessarily have to do with doing the right thing. It probably had more to do with wanting Sterling to offer her even more money for the information that she had. "In fact, I think that's the best idea. The police definitely need to know about this." "It's not like I'm a bad person," explained Mindy. "I took a real risk to get this information. I just need to know that I'm doing the right thing." The right thing would be hand the information over to the police. Mindy was just fishing for more money, Sterling decided. Not that she would get it. Sterling plunked out the cash from the ATM and pushed it into Mindy's purse before taking the envelope. "You are doing the right thing." Standing up, Sterling grabbed her crutches, leaving the unopened bottle of water behind. Mindy was counting the money. "This is it? I risked my job, my life, and this is all it's worth?" "Standard payout," responded Sterling. "You'll not get more from any other tabloid writer." "That is ridiculous," scoffed Mindy. "If I would have known, I never would have agreed to this." Mindy would likely be selling more copies that she had made to every other tabloid that she could contact before the morning was done. By tomorrow, every paper in the city would have the news. Mindy was not the type to not cash in on an opportunity like this. Ignoring the angry woman, Sterling crutched her way out of the cafe. The sun was starting to rise, and she knew of a sweet little restaurant that was open this early which was nearby. At the diner, she managed to snag a seat at the back. Ordering breakfast, Sterling sipped a coffee while unloading the contents of the envelope. Just as Mindy had said, there were copies of the drug log, pictures of the fridge where the vials were kept, and copies of the study summary. There was also a USB stick, which should contain all the data from the studies pertaining to IG-EGM, perhaps even an email trail. The email trail might prove that David had full knowledge of the drug. However, none of this would prove that David had actually killed Ted Searson. Anyone could have taken out a vial while taking the photographs of the fridge and the log. Obviously, security at Ramsley Pharma was not what it should be. However, it would prove that the police should look more closely into Searson's death, that it could very well be murder. Sterling leafed through the summary as she ate her breakfast. Mindy had been right. In studies on lab rats, the drug caused anaphylactic shock, a severe allergic reaction in nearly 80% of rats. Just over 60% died if no intervention was given. Ted Searson had been murdered. There was no doubt in Sterling's mind. She needed to see what was on the USB stick for certain. Sterling would plug it into her laptop at the apartment to verify its contents. After that, she would have to decide what to do with the information. She could not leverage it for a new job. No one would give her the time of day to hire her. Sterling believed that Mindy was probably selling the same package to the next tabloid even as Sterling finished her breakfast. There really was only one thing to do. She would give the information to the police. They, in turn, would give it to the FBI, and hopefully a full investigation would reveal David's part in Ted's murder. Sterling paused as a headline in the paper caught her eye. Quickly, she scanned the obituaries. Ted Searson's funeral was today. A few hours later, and she waited for people to slowly leave during the graveside ceremony. Ted Searson had been buried with all due pomp. No mention of his illustrious career as a possible drug smuggler mentioned. Ted's widow, Constance, blotted tears with a tissue, elegantly mourning her loss. Beside her, the prodigal son, Thad, stood stoically, returned from Taiwan or wherever he had run off to. A little to the side, daughter Bethany was tucked to the side of Andrew Colborne Ramsley. Not that Drew liked to be associated to the Ramsleys as one of David's illegitimate children. Bethany and Drew had recently become engaged. It was a whirlwind romance, and the cynical part of Sterling wondered just how long it would last. The romantic part of her hoped it would. They made a handsome couple, Drew holding an umbrella for them both in the light, drizzling rain. Other press snapped numerous photos, asked for comments, and were turned away by security before finally leaving. Thad murmured something to a tearful Bethany as he escorted Constance away from the graveside to a waiting limo. Even after crying, Bethany was achingly beautiful, Sterling reflected ruefully. When Sterling cried, she looked like the ugliest woman on earth for the rest of the day. The security detail had left with Thad and Constance Searson. There were a couple of Drew's co-workers, all cops, paying their respects. Sterling recognized Drew's sister Jana with her husband Miguel, as well as Drew's younger brother Molson. She had hoped to get just Bethany and Drew alone, but it did not look like that was going to happen. Drew looked up and caught Sterling's eye. He scowled, said something to Bethany, who nodded. Giving the umbrella to Molson to hold over Bethany's head, Drew walked over to Sterling. "You should leave," he said curtly. "We're not giving any comments to the press, especially to the tabloids." "I have been fired." Sterling decided to be direct. "I'm not here for a comment." Drew gave her a surprised look. "Then why are you here?" "You are a detective." She pulled Mindy's envelope out of her purse and offered it to him. "This is about Bethany's father. I believe he was murdered, and this is proof that his allergic reaction could have been manufactured with the intent to kill. Tomorrow it is going to be all over the papers." "Did you tip them off?" Drew carefully took the envelope, peering at its contents. "No. The source from Ramsley Pharmaceuticals sold it to everyone willing to buy." Sterling hoped that she could trust Drew with this information. It was well known that he had no love for the Ramsley family, even if he was David's son. "I don't believe that Michael ran drugs. I believe David has framed his son and killed Ted, the only man who might be able to testify against him." "Believing something and proving it are two different things," Drew commented dryly. "What is your motive in this, Barracuda?" Sterling winced at the nickname the police force had given her. "Like I said, I am out of the tabloid business. None of this information does me any good." "Why did they fire you?" he asked casually as he skimmed through the drug summary. "Ask your cousin Jake," sighed Sterling. Drew gave her a sharp look. "Look, I'm giving this to you, no favors, no expectations," she assured him. "Just tell me I'm doing the right thing, that you're going to have this looked into." "He would have stood by and let Bethany die," Drew remarked as he looked at his fiancée. She had recently suffered a prescription drug overdose and had thankfully survived. Her life had been threatened by the fact that as a child she had witnessed both her father and David Ramsley on a boat with bricks of white powdered drugs. The drug overdoses had been ruled as accidental by the FBI, even as evidence strongly suggested otherwise. "He's still her father and deserves to have his murder solved," responded Sterling, "especially if it puts David behind bars. We both know David had a hand in nearly killing Bethany, even if it cannot be proven right now." Drew nodded at her reasoning. "I suppose I should thank you for this." Sterling shrugged. "Like I said, everyone's going to know about it tomorrow morning when the papers are out. I'm just giving you a head start." Leaning on her crutches, Sterling started to hop away, but Drew's voice stopped her.
Hey, are you really fired?
Yep. Ask Jake. Or call Dubious. Sterling had a bitter laugh. No one will answer. The entire paper has been shut down.
I will ask Jake,
Drew confirmed as he looked at her intently.
You have sources that I don't have. Is there any way that you can press on them for more information?
You want me to cooperate with your investigation? Sterling was surprised. The police force generally looked down on her, wanting nothing to do with the tabloids unless it suited their purposes to mislead the public for a case.
I can't pay you anything, warned Drew. If you find something out, I would appreciate it if you could pass it along to me.
I'll need your number. Sterling decided she had nothing to lose. She annoyed the Ramsey family for long enough. Perhaps now she could help them out a little. Drew grabbed a card out of his wallet, handing it to her. He gave her a nod before heading back to Bethany. He wrapped an arm around her, talking softly. Sterling bit the inside of her cheek to quell a stab of envy. If she had to lay odds on it, she bet the couple would make it for the long haul. For a moment, Sterling allowed herself to dwell on what it might have been like to have someone like Jake look at her like that. That was never going to happen. With a sigh, she made her way out of the cemetery. There was a nearby bus stop, so Sterling waited with her bus pass ready. She had been spending far too much on taxis lately. It was time to watch what little cash she had left. The rent was due soon, and Sterling was going to have to give her roommates notice that she was leaving. She would continue to press her sources and pass the information to Drew if it was relevant, but she could do that from her parents' home while Sterling licked her wounds over Jake and the destruction of her career. She was going to be leaving New York, much the way that she had entered it, with no prospects, very little money, and on a bus. If you enjoyed this chapter of Stranded with the Billionaire, Book 6 of the Ramsey Brothers series, look for the next chapter coming here on YouTube. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the little bell at the top so that you don't miss further chapters. This helps me with the algorithms and is free for you to do. Have a great day and happy listening.